Professionals. Wherever you are in your career journey, this show will help you move forward with confidence. I am Paddy and I am joined by my co host Praveen, and each of us has more than 20 years of experience working across industries, functions, and geographies. In today's episode, we will turn our attention to the topic of remote work. We will talk about what it means, the advantages and challenges that come with working remotely, and some tips and advice to consider if you want to be effective when working remotely, which, by all indications, is here to stay.
Let me provide some context first. Remote working is not new. For many years now, we have been working virtually with colleagues that are located in a different country or time zone. What this pandemic has done is brought virtual work closer home so that even someone that used to sit next to you in the office is now virtual. Now, given the nature of the Indian IT and services industry, most of our teams were physically located in the office, and usually it was a client or a smaller on site contingent that was working virtually. So 90% of the team was physical and only 10% was virtual. In that scenario, it's easy to put in that extra bit of effort to make things work with your virtual team. But now 100% of your team is virtual. And as you can imagine, there is a lot of extra effort that you need to put in. And there is no shying away from that fact that it does take extra effort to operate successfully in a virtual world, and it can be overwhelming. However, if you approach it in a thoughtful, deliberate, and planned manner, you will be successful. This remote work model will likely remain. Maybe not 100% of your team will be virtual, but it is almost certain that it will be way more than the 10% that you're used to. One more caveat: what we are experiencing right now is not simply virtualization of the workspace. This is virtualization in a crisis situation. People are worried about the health and safety of their friends and families. There are restrictions on routine activities such as travel, and many are dealing with loss of loved ones. And all these factors make it so much harder to be effective in a virtual world. But again, as we said, if you approach it in a thoughtful manner, and if you follow some of the techniques that we are going to discuss in this episode, you will be successful.
Hello, let's talk about how remote work has affected communication in the workplace. Verbal communication is often not the only way that we communicate. Our communication often uses multiple nonverbal cues, and this is especially true when communicating emotions. The one argument is workplace, or in this case, work setting, is not a place where you show your emotion. But the truth is that the workplace is not a place where you just have a transactional relationship with people. We are human and we work alongside our colleagues and for long periods of time during the day. We make friends and, in some cases, enemies as well. And it's true, you often do get frustrated and disappointed by certain things that happen in your workplace. And sometimes you may even get angry. Communicating all of these emotions does get extremely hard when working remotely. Let's take an example. Let's say you're in a face to face discussion and you get disinterested or bored. Often it is very easy for the other person to sense that you have stopped paying attention from nonverbal cues. Your eyes starts glazing over, you start getting more fidgety, you start looking at your watch if you have a watch, and so on. And that's sort of a cue for the other person to change the topic or stop the conversation. Things like these are very difficult to judge in a remote conversation. Having the video on can help. it still may not give the full picture. And often when the video is on, you're looking at something else. You may be checking out a Facebook page or Insta page. That doesn't help either. Similarly, how do you really communicate frustration? Emotions such as frustration often shows in your face. And it's true, we do go through all those emotions. Now, how do you communicate all of these things when working remotely? And that's a challenge. A couple of things that you could do that can help. One is always try to verbalize more. So certain messages that are implicitly conveyed while dealing in person now will have to be explicitly communicated. And this applies to both positive and negative feelings. In case where you don't understand something, let's say if the other person is explaining something and you don't understand it, you may have to state it very explicitly. If you need to time box discussions because you are in a hurry, say that up front. Remember, the other side, the person does not know that you're tired or in a hurry. In case you're frustrated, do voice that opinion. And also be extra attentive to any signals or cues that may indicate frustration or challenge. The second thing you could do as a listener is practice what we call as reflective listening. So reflective listening is when you seek to understand a speaker's idea and then you sort of offer the idea back to the speaker or paraphrase it back to the speaker to confirm that the idea has been understood correctly. Remember, in a remote setting, even your head nods and all those other cues that show that you're following it may not be that effective. Pay special attention to listening because it's hard to know what the other person is thinking or feeling when interacting virtually. Right? It is very easy to get distracted in remote meetings, and keep that in mind and pay special attention to how you listen. The other practical tip is that have the video on whenever possible and try to avoid looking at Facebook or LinkedIn or Insta or whatever your social network poison is.
Communication is important, but even more so when you are operating remotely and are not able to interact in person with your colleagues. In a virtual world, people can't see you. So if you don't say something, no one knows what you're thinking. So you need to be explicit in your communication. Take an extra minute to reread your emails to make sure they are clear and communicating what you want them to. If you're working as part of a team and are working on an activity or a task that spans several days, it's a good idea for you to drop in an email with status updates from time to time so that your managers and stakeholders know where things are. If you're not sure of something, you should ask questions. That's the only way people around you know that they need to clarify something. And even if you think you've understood something, it's a good idea to restate your understanding and get confirmation or feedback. You do have to slow things down a bit in a virtual world to make sure that everyone on the team has a proper shared understanding of their roles and responsibilities. Does this seem like a lot of work? Well, it is extra work, but it's better to put in this effort upfront than land in a situation where your project or deliverable is jeopardized due to miscommunication and misunderstanding in the team. And the same rules apply whether you are a team manager or a team member. All of us have to be more conscious and thoughtful of what we are communicating and how we are doing it. Here are some best practices I have seen that work very well. On one of the teams that I work with, we have a daily team huddle where we talk about the day's plan, activities, issues, etc. We do it at the start of each day, and we use it to discuss what we accomplished the day before and what's on our plate today. It clarifies the goal and focus for the day. I know some teams who do a huddle like this 2 or 3 times a day. It depends on the nature of the project or deadline. And in some cases, meeting frequently, even if it's for a 5 minute check in, let's say every 2 to 3 hours in a day, can be useful if you're working towards a critical deadline. Or you could do one meeting at the beginning of the day and another at the end of the day so you know where things are. Another great practice that I have seen is to create a shared team calendar where people can post their vacation availability, etc., so that everyone on the team has visibility to your schedules. If you have a vacation coming up, my suggestion is you should communicate that to your team at least a couple of weeks in advance so that they have the time to plan for alternatives when you're gone. Again, in a virtual world, one email might not register. So sometimes you have to communicate these multiple times via emails, calls, instant messages, etc. Is it more work? Yes, but it avoids confusion and misunderstanding later. And it helps you enjoy your vacation because people are not going to send you emails or call you on your phone. Another tip is to consider synchronizing the work and break timings of your team. For example, maybe you can have a common time in the day where the entire team takes a break for lunch, dinner, etc. And what this allows you to do is to maximize the together time of the team so that when you're working on something and you need to contact a team member, you know that they are going to be available during that time and they're not uh, away on a break, etc. And this also helps to bring the team quickly together for a huddle in case there is something that you need to let everyone know, which is critical for the work that the team is doing. Also, consider setting aside a specific slot to have a call or a meeting where you as a team can talk about things outside of work. You can do this maybe once a week or a couple of times a week. Again, the duration can depend on the composition of the team and the team dynamics. But setting aside this time to talk about things that are outside of work helps in two ways. One, because you have this call where you're going to unwind and talk about other things, when you have a call that pertains to work, your team can stay focused on work. You don't need to do small talk there. You don't need to talk about other things. You can keep your work calls focused on work so that they start on time and they end on time, hopefully sooner, and all of us can go back and do what we need to do. So it helps in that manner. But also, obviously, a second way in which this helps is you are creating a way or a forum where even though we are all operating virtually, there is still an element of socialization and bonding that happens with the team. And when you know that this call or this meeting is scheduled specifically to talk about non work things, everyone is relaxed. No one is worried about taking notes. No one is worried about what someone's going to say. We can all be ourselves and just have a good time and relax. So this is something else that you can consider as part of your approach to communication in the virtual world.
Now let's talk a little bit about work life balance. Working virtually offers benefits as well as challenges. The benefits are in the form of reduced or zero commute time. There are fewer breaks, there's no distracting chatter from your colleagues, there are no unofficial or unannounced tea breaks, and so on. And you also have the flexibility to start your day early or late. And these factors should potentially improve the productivity. But on the flip side, there are challenges as well. Primarily, work provides a structure to life. Get up in the morning, you get ready, go to office, right? You work, and then you come back, and then you wind down. What happens in a remote setting is that structure goes away. Second is, when you're working remotely, this boundary between work and personal space and personal time becomes very poorly defined, because you're at your home, and you might as well be doing your personal work or your work, and when does your personal work start and when does your other work end? It's completely unclear. The third challenge is, while many of the activities may be more efficiently done in a remote and isolated fashion, there are some activities that are much more time consuming when done remotely. For example, if you have an ideation session or brainstorming sessions, or you want to drive consensus across a different set of people, all of these things take much longer remotely than in person. Similarly, now when your conversations are all now virtual, anything that you want to get done by your team does get very difficult. It gets much more time consuming. So, how do you mitigate some of these challenges? The first one is, try to have a structure to your day and try to get into a routine. You start your work at a certain time, you stop at a certain time. In some cases, at least dress up, because that's sort of a cue to your mind that, okay, you're getting ready to work, and get away from your personal work. Next is, plan your workday. Have a well defined daily goal and long term goal and a to do list and so on. Right? That helps keep you focused during your work. And try to keep your personal work and your sort of official work separate. And just because there is no direct line of sight by your manager, don't overindulge in your personal calls and Insta messages and WhatsApp messages and so on. One other issue that many people have complained is this, unplanned IM messages and calls and so on, right? And in many cases, you're expected to reply, because otherwise the other person thinks that you're not working. Right? It's a very devious way of checking whether you're working or not, but it is true. In some companies, it happens. Now, one thing you could do is to block off certain hours of the day just to focus on deliverables. In your Slack messages, just say that you're unavailable for 2 hours, and this is your time that you're doing sort of focused work for your deliverable. So these are some of the things that you could do to mitigate these challenges of working remotely.
One of the biggest challenges when working virtually, undoubtedly, is how do we build connections and relationships at work, especially with those people with whom we don't work directly or regularly. These informal relationships are often key to both your individual success as well as that of your organization. Let's say, for example, you are a marketing guy in an IT product company. It helps for you to know someone in the product management team whom you can use as a sounding board when you come up with new ideas or initiatives, because their input is going to be very valuable for you to come up with something that's going to be relevant and successful for the organization. But how do you get to know people like that, people in teams outside yours, if you're not going into the office? Or harder still, how do you build these relationships if you actually joined this organization in the midst of the pandemic where everything was virtual? It takes some work, but it can be done. And here are some ways that I have used which have worked for me well. A great way to meet and form relationships with people outside your organization is to use forums such as meetings and trainings. For example, if someone from outside your team was at an online meeting you attended, say it was an annual strategy session or a firm-wide training that you went to, and there was someone else or there were other people from other parts of the organization that also came and participated in that meeting, use that familiarity to reach out to them. In many meetings and trainings, they usually create these breakout activities where we are put in smaller groups and we have to work together as a group. And what happens as a result is the people in these groups get to know each other well during that session. But what happens is we sort of forget everything after the session. We don't keep in touch and we lose out on that relationship. So don't lose opportunities like that. So if you came into contact with someone during a meeting or a training, nurture that relationship by following up with them after the training or meeting. Maybe schedule a call once a month or once a quarter, whatever is an appropriate cadence, and nurture that relationship. And that may come in handy when you need to reach out to that person. A second way to build these relationships is to simply ask your colleagues or managers for an introduction. For example, if you're working on something where you feel that you need inputs from someone who has a good understanding of finance, or you need to talk to someone in the finance department, ask your manager if there is someone that he or she knows that they would recommend that you talk to. And in most cases, if you take this approach, you will find what or who you're looking for. Another way to build these relationships is to just, what I would say, cold call people. If you know someone in your organization that you want to connect with, simply reach out. End of the day, your colleagues. So there is no harm or no shame in reaching out to someone else that works in the same organization as yours. And this is true even if you're new to the organization. And especially so if you are new to the organization, because my experience is that people are very welcoming when you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm new to this organization and I wanted to reach out and connect with you so I can learn more about the organization. I can learn more about what you do. And I want to hear if you have any advice or tips for me to be successful in this organization. So don't let the constraints of virtualization come in the way of building these relationships and creating a network for yourself in the organization, because like I said, these networks are useful not only for your own individual success but also for that of the organization.
Thank you for listening to our show. We wish you all the very best in your career journey. Please stay tuned for our next episodes. This is Paddy and Praveen signing off from Career Console.